looking at the time, we do have time for a panel discussion. So I'm going to bring Nick and Maia onto the stage.
Hey everyone.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi Maia, hi Nick.
Hey.
Hey, hey everyone. Yeah, so I guess I'll kickstart. I actually do have a question. So Thomas, you've written a book. Tell us how that's going. What was the process like? How long did it take you to write? How's the feedback?
I started writing the book in July last year. It took me roughly 7 months, I think. No, 5 months. It was very exciting because it was my first book written in English, which is not my native tongue. So doing more than 200 pages in a foreign language was a little frightening at first, but I got some help from the publisher. And I mean, fortunately, I had been doing articles in the past, so it wasn't too new experience. But like I said, writing longer text in a foreign language can be sort of challenging, but I got along nicely. What probably is the most important thing when writing a book is making yourself some schedule, some time frame, and stick to this. I mean, imagine when you do the book not as your main job, but you do it in your spare time or after you did your regular job. You probably will be exhausted from your daily work, and forcing you to write an hour or 90 minutes each day to get the book done is something that may work most of the time, but it truly won't work each day. So you need to take into account that there are some days you just can't write anything because you're too exhausted. And it took some time in the past to learn how many pages I can write in a day. Fortunately, I got that from my German book, so I could set myself somewhat reliable time frame. But for new aspiring authors, this would probably be the most tricky part. Thinking, I surely can do 5 or 6 pages each day. Sorry, you probably won't be able to do that much. And learning how much you can do is really the interesting part.
Well, very nice, man. Yeah, so we actually have a question from Sylvia. So she says, Thomas, is your book topic related to your day job, or do you do all your research after hours?
In a way, it is related to my day job. I lead a small mobile team. So we do have clients that ask us to do mobile apps, but they unfortunately they tend to use other technologies. So partly I can use my Jetpack Compose knowledge, but not to the full potential. So basically, most of my Android stuff happened in my spare time. The company I've been waiting for comes from the Java enterprise ecosystem. Basically, that's why I came to Android in 2009, because I knew how to write Java apps. But yes, to some extent, it is part of my daily job, but not that much that I would wish for.
Nice. Maia, how are you doing?
I'm great, and I have questions.
Sure, fire away.
So it's probably for Nick, but I think because Ahmed has just recently done a talk on adding Compose to an existing app, and maybe Thomas because of the book. So we get some really nice guidelines from Google in the documents on like what possible migration strategies you can follow. You can either make a button and then slowly put the components of Compose in your app, or you can do it on a screen by screen basis. And that's really useful. But I'm still having an issue. Like conceptually figuring out like a big app, like a Luno app or another app, the theming and the colors, and that's the one question. What kind of, because yes, we can do the conversion, and I asked that question about the conversion, or what is the kind of guidelines around how to handle theming? That's the first question. And then the other question is around packages and where to put all the things, because I can see that we can have like packages by feature and then start putting Compose things in there, or you can have a separate module that has your design system in there. What are the guidelines or suggestions or ideas around that? So 2 questions.
I can probably comment on the theming front. Also have some opinions on the effectively like what you might call like the packages or architecture organization, really. But on the theming front, like I'm guessing this is somewhat similar to the question I got earlier, is that like if you have a big like XML theme or set of XML themes that you were using in your view-based app that don't just use the material attributes, like what do you do? And to be honest, at this point in time, like Compose offers, as I sort of showed you in the talk today, this material theme, which is strictly tied to material values. And then if you want to add additional values, you kind of have to take some of the approaches that I mentioned today of like extending a material theme and providing those via composition locals, etc. But there's also that tool, the Compose theme adapter library, which we offer, but that's pretty much strictly for take material theming attributes, pipe them to material theme, and the default values for both material design 2 and material 3. There isn't currently a tool that we offer like that for custom theming attributes and the many things that you could do in XML. It's, as I said earlier when I was answering that question, it's definitely something that I'm aware of. And if you can browse the source of that theme adapter library, and all that sort of like scaffolding is there for me to do that, to make it more flexible and allow you to support your own theme attributes. I just, to be honest, haven't got there. But it is certainly on the radar, and it sounds like it would be very useful. And it isn't the first time I've actually got this feature request. So there's that, and that's more like a to-do for almost for me, or to delegate it to someone else. But I would also say that like one part of this that is slightly more conceptual is that I think thinking about theming in XML is different to thinking about theming in Compose. The XML system was very flexible, so you can virtually theme like everything, well, not everything, but like a lot of things that sometimes aren't even UI related in your XML theme. I can't think of a very specific example now, but like one, although it is visual, like you can set your status bar colors and your navigation bar colors in your theme. But in a way, that's touching more on system UI and those sorts of areas. So in the Compose world, which is meant to model the material design system, that doesn't quite fit in. So I guess the point that I'm roughly getting to is that I would think more of Compose as like, is it a good idea to make something a composition local, i.e. like globally available? If it is, then like use some of the approaches that I've mentioned today. If it isn't, maybe migrate something that you would previously have done in an XML theme to another implementation in Compose, like a convenient function or some setup around like system UI or whatever. Yeah, I know that's a bit vague, but effectively, like, I think the XML system was so flexible that it made us think that like everything can and should be themed. But in Compose, I think they're trying to say, let's tone that down a bit, because that flexibility led to a lot of indirection and a lot of like misconceptions. And actually, if I think about it, like themes and styles are one of those topics that developers still to this day say, I have no idea how that works. And it's still something that we as Android dev role deal with and have tried to publish documentation for, but it still confuses people. So yeah, that's my probably more than 2 cents, more like 5 cents.
Yeah.
On the matter.
So that means though that you're going to sit with like two sources of truth in a way, because the other thing is the styles, right? The styles, they don't go into theme, normally your XML styles, and those actually end up being attributes inside a particular component composable. Like because typically you would put a style on some other component, and then that style goes now inside the composable. So you're going to have the two things. You're going to have some of the things in the crazy complicated mess of XML, and you're going to have some other things which are just like part of Compose. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You can't really escape it.
No, I mean, there's the mental model doc of Compose that I think is probably a good place to start with this, which is like thinking differently when you're implementing stuff in Compose. But I get that there's this like world which people are living in now where they've got a view-based app and a Compose app. But things like those styles, like default styles for components, things like other XML attributes that sort of stray beyond your actual app and even beyond UI, like I would personally say that those are things that we'd ideally move away from theming and rather do things like just create a separate file with your app's button in it and use that in place everywhere, or handle other aspects that you were theming in place where necessary. Like it is something that I do admit we probably need some documentation on. It's like a missing area, so to speak, but yeah, it's great.
So I guess if you see the theme as something that you'd want to switch, like for day night or for switching in a particular place that you want to have consistently switched through your app. The other things which are like values that are the same no matter what your app's doing, then that could potentially be. Anyway, that was just the first question. I don't know if Ahmed or Thomas have any comments on that.
No, I'm actually also curious about the question around the architecture, because like my approach has been when it represents a screen, I have a UI directory, and then I have the different screens. So let's say if it's the dashboard screen, and then I'll have a package that will represent that, and then there I'll have the composable representing the screen, and then little components I'll have a separate area for them, and then widgets I'll have a separate area for them. So I guess at this point it's more like everyone kind of has their own approach, but like what Maia was saying, so is there like some sort of maybe recommended way of packaging things? So if someone was to go the module approach, where you have a module that now represents your Compose app, then would that be ideal, or is it something that you just introduce, like in my case, introducing composable screens and having them lay separately with your normal fragments and all of that until you actually remove the fragments, that type of thing?
So I can tell you one problem that the module system has, right? So if you have a module with your design system in it at a separate level parallel to your app, you can't use any string resources in that module that the main app needs. So in that particular case, maybe the components and the design system sits in a separate module, but in the main app where the screens are, when you're busy building the screens, you probably still will have Compose elements inside the main app because they need the resources that come from your resource system that matches the whole of the rest of the app. So there is certainly a sort of a split there. And then the other thing I'm thinking is there's like two schools of thought people. Some people say, like from the clean architecture point of view, people are saying if you look at the packages, you need to know what the packages are doing. Like, so you have like more use case or feature-based packages, which would mean then that your Compose screens will be dotted in each of these use case packages. And then I've seen other people doing it by layer, like they have all the data layer stuff and they have all the domain layer stuff. So it depends how you slice and dice your packages. Yeah.
I mean, coming from the Java enterprise world, where we had all these discussions how the only true package distribution should be. Now I tend to be a little more relaxed and try to advocate a pragmatic approach. Probably it depends on the size of the app. There are some guidelines we get from the Compose mental models. We need to make sure that our composables are testable individually. So we probably, I really like the way Ahmed described how he's doing things, because that sounded reasonable and not too much overhead from an architectural point of view. But frankly, there probably is no only true way of laying things out. So it probably also relates to how the communication with the data layer takes place and what data actually the app is dealing with. So probably I would try to be as pragmatic as possible and add additional layers of abstraction only if they are needed. I mean, at some point in time, the app is probably too big, so we need to have a true modularization scheme. But if we don't need it, maybe we can do without it.
Yeah, the benefit
Yeah.
though of having your design system in a module, sorry, Nick, is that you can package it separately and make a sort of an app that's like a showcase app of your design system. And then you can have that as a quick compile build thing, which doesn't build with your big app. Anyway, Nick, your turn.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with what everyone would say, yeah, but I'm going to do the classic Google thing and say there are some docs available. They're quite long, but I do, as someone said, like the mental model, the docs actually called Thinking in Compose, is probably a really good one to start with. Similarly, there's docs on architectural layering and architecting your Compose UI. All of that is available on developer.android.com. And I'll also say that it's still quite young. Like even we are still kind of figuring that out, and we're doing it in like you can probably see some of that thinking exposed in the Jetpack Compose samples GitHub repository, which is basically a bunch of samples that we maintain and experiment with. That being said, I will acknowledge that those samples tend to not be fully representative of these big real-world apps. That's something that we've been looking at and addressing. Can't really talk too much about it, but I'll also add to that is that like well, not the problems, but the approaches and challenges that we've listed yesterday aren't like, I wouldn't say exclusive to Compose. Like I remember having these similar discussions when creating a view-based app from scratch when I used to work at Over, and like we were discussing what architecture we're going to use. Are we going to use like MVVM, or we're going to use some kind of like a unidirectional data flow, or like why, how, who? And it kind of ended up being a case of this is what the team is familiar with, this is what suits the type of app that it is, and we tried something out and kind of liked it, and that's what works. Things will change with Compose, I think. I think if anything, I would hope that things would get simpler, and not like they wouldn't need to necessarily overcomplicate our architecture if we don't need to, but because of that, like there's no longer that split between XML and Java and some of the complexities that came with the view-based system. But in any case, yeah, that's a bunch of thoughts I'm just going to dump there.
Nice. Thomas, your book, so does it actually, what level of developer would benefit greatly from it? Is it beginners, or is it more intermediate, or is it more advanced, or is it for everyone?
Actually, it's an introduction to Jetpack Compose, but I'm assuming knowledge of how to do Android apps. So I'm don't say anything about Kotlin as a programming language or how to set up your development environment. So I'm basically focusing on how to write Compose apps. So you probably need to have a solid understanding of how Android app development works. I do have some introductory pages where I compare the mindset of the traditional view approach, because we need to fully grasp the difference between imperative UI toolkits and the new declarative world, because if we don't manage to do this mind shift, we probably won't be writing good Compose apps. So I'm do some sort of recap how the view system works, because I need that to show, hey, here are key differences, you need to be aware of them. So that's the introductory part, and the remaining part of the book really focuses on Compose, and I'm not explaining other parts of Android app development. So like I said, you need a thorough understanding of how to do view-based apps to really get the real benefit of the book. Having said that, of course it's an introduction to Jetpack Compose, so I do some peeks under the hood, because I feel it is necessary to see how composition, recomposition works. I need to explain some of these things, but it's not it's really not an internals book. So if we want to know how to Compose works under the hood, I would probably refer everybody to Jorge Castillo's Compose Internals, which is an awesome read. So my book tackles more the how to do UI point of view.
Very nice. I'm actually looking forward to reading it. I actually have it on pre-order. Yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, so I guess just to round.
Sorry, I actually missed what you said there.
A Siri decided to take over my laptop there and thought I was giving a command. Yeah. So Nick, do you have any thoughts? So someone who's new to Compose, or maybe someone who's an existing developer who's looked at this thing, is hesitant to actually adopt it, what would you say to them?
That's the money question right there, I guess. No, I would say the feedback that we've received from most developers is that there's curiosity. And I would say, if you are curious about it, just try it out. It is a new toolkit. It's not fully done yet, but it is certainly an area where Android is investing a lot of its time and future investments towards as the, let's say, next main toolkit of Android. It can't fully replace your view-based app yet, but it's close enough for you to have parts of your UI and at least share that in a production app at the moment. Plus, if we consider that the investment from JetBrains into some of the multi-platform areas, like Compose for desktop, for example, I think there's a lot of potential there for this to be a toolkit of sorts that allows you to write once, run everywhere. But for now, it is certainly the space where Android is getting the most amount of attention. And there's a lot of basically entry-level beginner courses that we have, code labs, documentation, and then these new things called pathways, which basically combine code labs and docs and videos into this sort of stream bit of work, which you can find on developer.android.com. But again, the great part about it is that we also have Google developer experts like Thomas and third-party things for you to learn from, which are just as equally valuable, so that you have both sides of the story. You have Google side, you have the external side, and sometimes actually need both, because that experience of using it in a real world and externally and in production apps in the Play Store is invaluable. So in a nutshell, at the very least, try it out. Maybe make a little playground app. Maybe try and pitch for it to be introduced in your company if you're an Android developer, and have a test screen that you don't necessarily ship to production yet. try migrate a screen and see what pain points you come across. And at the end of the day, complain to me on Twitter when you come into, actually don't do that, or do that sometimes, but complain a little bit when you come across things that don't work, because ultimately that helps to improve it. Yeah.